Alright, let's go. Number 10. The Tomb of Qin Shi Huang. The largest sealed burial chamber in the world has been sitting beneath a hill in Shanxi province for over 2,000 years, and the people who know the most about it have voted unanimously to leave it shut. On the morning of March 29, 1974, a farmer named Yang Jifa drove a spade into dry earth outside the city of Xi'an, China, looking for a place to sink a well. What he hit instead was the crown of a terracotta head. The excavation teams that arrived over the following weeks peeled back soil to reveal the outer pits of the mausoleum of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, who died in 210 BCE. Those outer chambers, containing over 8,000 ceramic soldiers, horses, and officials, were described by the state press as one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century. But the burial mound itself, a grass-covered hill roughly the size of a city block called Mount Li, was not opened. It has not been opened since. Historian Sima Qian, writing in approximately 90 BCE, left a description of the inner tomb's contents. He described rivers of liquid mercury flowing through miniature bronze channels to simulate the Yangtze and Yellow rivers, a ceiling inlaid with pearls to represent the sky, and crossbow traps set to fire automatically against anyone who entered. In 2003, a team from the State Administration of Cultural Heritage conducted ground-penetrating radar scans of the mound. Archaeologist Duan Qingbo, then of Shanxi Provincial Archaeological Research, reported that the central burial chamber showed readings consistent with unusually high concentrations of a heavy metallic element in the soil, at levels high enough to be measured through 20 feet of compacted earth. The scans were published in the journal Archaeology in a limited domestic release. The mercury readings received a single paragraph. The state press emphasized the ceramic soldiers. The mound remained unannounced as a formal excavation site. In 2020, the Chinese National Cultural Heritage Administration formally reclassified the mound as a protected site under Statute 39 of the Law on the Protection of Cultural Relics, citing the inadequacy of current preservation technology. The decision was announced in a two-sentence footnote to a broader heritage funding report. No timeline for future opening was provided. But the statute does not address what Sima Qian described next to the mercury rivers, the bodies of craftsmen sealed inside after completing the tomb so that the mechanisms they had built could never be described to anyone alive. And the mound is large enough, its base covers nearly a square mile of Shanxi farmland, that whatever is at its center has now been sitting undisturbed for long enough that the mercury, if it is there, would have had time to settle into every surface it was ever poured across. Number 9. The Tomb of Amenhotep II. When the outer door was cut open in the spring of 1898, the man who walked through it found something that the official excavation report described in precise bureaucratic language as unexpected. On March 9, 1898, French Egyptologist Victor Loret entered KV 35 in the Valley of the Kings, the tomb of Amenhotep II, who ruled Egypt from approximately 1427 to 1401 BCE. The tomb had been identified by its hieroglyphic cartouche but had not been formally entered in the modern period. Loret's team broke through a sealed inner doorway and descended into the burial chamber. What Loret found there he wrote down in his field journal the same evening, in French, in a handwriting his colleagues later described as uncharacteristically unsteady. He had found not one mummy but 16, including 9 arranged in a side chamber in positions that suggested they had not been placed there by the original tomb builders. Grafton Elliott Smith, a professor of anatomy at Cairo's Government School of Medicine, examined the mummies in situ in 1907. He noted that several of the 9 additional bodies bore ligature marks at the wrists consistent with binding, and that at least 3 showed evidence of perimortem trauma to the thoracic cavity. Smith filed his observations in a supplementary appendix to the formal excavation report. He did not speculate on causation. The appendix was printed in a limited scholarly edition in 1912 and did not appear in the popular press account of the discovery. The newspapers in Cairo and London ran the story as the discovery of a royal cache, mummies removed from other tombs and stored in KV 35 during a period of tomb robbing in the 21st dynasty. That version of events has persisted as the standard explanation. In 1978, The Egyptian Antiquities Organization formally catalogued all 16 bodies and reclassified the 9 secondary mummies as Third Intermediate Period reburials. The classification was issued as a one-page administrative update. Smith's 1907 appendix was not referenced. And yet the positioning Loret noted on the night of the discovery, one body seated upright against the wall, face turned toward the sealed doorway, does not correspond to any documented reburial practice from any period of Egyptian history. KV-35 is one of the longest continuous burial tunnels in the Valley of the Kings, running more than 90 meters into solid limestone, and the 9 bodies were found in its deepest room. Number 8. Newgrange. The Passage Tomb in County Meath, Ireland was built to admit sunlight precisely once per year, which means that whoever engineered it spent more effort on the light's path inside than on anything visible from the outside. On the morning of December 21, 1967, archaeologist Michael J. O'Kelly stood alone inside the central chamber of Newgrange, a passage tomb constructed on a ridge above the River Boyne in Ireland around 3200 BCE, making it older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. O'Kelly had been excavating the site for 15 years. On this particular morning, he was waiting for sunrise. At approximately 8:58, a shaft of light entered through a small rectangular aperture above the passage entrance, a feature called a roof box, which O'Kelly had uncovered during excavation and which had not been documented by any previous researcher. The light moved down a passage 19 meters long and illuminated the central chamber floor for approximately 17 minutes before withdrawing. O'Kelly stood in the light. He later wrote that he did not move for the full duration. Professor Frank Mitchell of Trinity College Dublin, who served as a scientific advisor to the excavation, formally measured the roof box aperture. It is oriented to a tolerance of less than 1 degree from the winter solstice sunrise azimuth. The chamber beneath it contains 3 carved stone basins. Each basin held at the time of opening the cremated remains of human individuals. The total count across all 3 was estimated at 5 adults, based on bone fragment density analysis conducted by physical anthropologist Laureen Buckley. The remains were not interred after death. They were placed in the basins while the light still came. The discovery was reported internationally as a Neolithic solar calendar, a sophisticated astronomical monument. The cremated remains received a paragraph in the Irish Times. The roof box alignment became the attraction. In 1993, the Office of Public Works formally designated Newgrange as a UNESCO World Heritage Site under its astronomical and architectural significance. Annual admission to the winter solstice chamber is now allocated by lottery. The basins remain in situ, undisturbed. But the roof box admits light for exactly 17 minutes. Not sunrise, not solstice dawn. 17 minutes measured to precision by people who did not have clocks, who carried 5 human bodies up a ridge and placed them in stone bowls to receive it. The ridge at Newgrange is visible from every major passage tomb in the Boyne Valley cluster. There are at least 40 of them within a 12-mile radius, all oriented to face it. Number 7. The Royal Tombs of Ur. When Leonard Woolley descended into the Great Death Pit in 1928, he counted the bodies before he touched anything, and the number he reached changed the working theory of early civilization in a way that has never been fully absorbed. November 1928, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley reached the lowest level of the Royal Cemetery at Ur, a burial site in modern southern Iraq used by the ancient Sumerian civilization from approximately 2600 BCE. Woolley had been excavating the site in layers for 2 seasons. The chamber he reached that month, designated PG-1237 and later called the Great Death Pit, contained no royal sarcophagus. It contained 74 human skeletons arranged in rows on the floor, dressed in full ceremonial regalia, gold headdresses, lapis lazuli necklaces, copper vessels still held in the hands of the dead. No sign of violence, no evidence of disease. 74 people had walked into a pit, arranged themselves in rows and stopped. Woolley's field assistant, Max Mallowan, later the husband of Agatha Christie and himself a distinguished archaeologist, examined the skeletal positions in situ. He noted that the skulls showed a consistent forward tilt and that several skeletons had their hands still curled around small cups. A soil sample taken from the cup interiors was analyzed at the British Museum in 1929 by chemist Samuel Pickard, who identified residues consistent with a plant-derived alkaloid. The specific compound was not identified with available technology. Malowan's notes, archived in the British Museum, describe the positioning as orderly beyond any accidental arrangement. The discovery was reported in the Illustrated London News as evidence of a retainer sacrifice, servants choosing death to accompany their rulers into the afterlife. The cup residues were described as likely wine. The alkaloid finding appeared in a technical appendix to Woolley's 1934 monograph. Woolley's full excavation report was published by the British Museum in 1934 and formally classified the deaths as voluntary retainer sacrifice consistent with early royal burial practice. The chemical appendix was not included in subsequent popular editions of the monograph. The cups remained in the collections of the Penn Museum and the British Museum. And yet no other royal burial site from the same period, in the same region, across the subsequent century of excavation, has produced a comparable assemblage, not at Kish, not at Nippur, not at Lagash. 74 people dressed and arranged in one pit in one city once. The cemetery at covers an area equivalent to roughly 6 city blocks, and Woolley excavated perhaps a quarter of it before funding was withdrawn in 1934. Number 6. The Tomb of the Sunken Skull at Çatalhöyük. The bodies were buried beneath the floors of the houses where the living continued to sleep, which means that for at least 1,000 years, every family at this site went to bed directly above their dead. Çatalhöyük is a Neolithic settlement in south-central Turkey occupied continuously from approximately 7,500 to 5,700 BCE, among the largest and best documented early human settlements on Earth. Excavations led by James Mellart beginning in 1958 and resumed by Ian Hodder of Stanford University beginning in 1993 have revealed that the site's residents buried their dead not in external cemeteries but directly beneath the sleeping platforms inside their homes, in a flexed fetal position, interred with personal objects and occasionally with the heads of other individuals, human skulls. Removed from the body after decomposition and sometimes painted red with ochre, placed beside or beneath the primary burial. In 2006, members of Hodder's team, excavating Building 77, uncovered a primary burial of an adult female beneath the sleeping platform with 3 separate human skulls arranged around her body. None of the skulls belonged to her. Physical anthropologist Clark Spencer Larson of Ohio State University, a senior member of the Çatalhöyük research project, analyzed the skulls in 2007. 2 had been deliberately separated from their skeletons after the soft tissue had decomposed, a process requiring a waiting period of at minimum several months. The 3rd skull showed fresh cut marks consistent with perimortem decapitation. All 3 were coated in red ochre applied after separation. Larson's analysis noted that the handling of the skulls required sustained physical attention across an extended period. Someone had returned to a decomposing body, extracted the head, transported it, prepared it, and placed it with care. The discovery was reported in press releases from the Çatalhöyük research project as evidence of ancestor veneration, a ritual practice in which the skulls of revered community members were circulated and preserved. The cut marks on the 3rd skull received a clause in a supplementary paper. Hodder's team formally published the Building 77 findings in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal in 2010. The ochre application and skull circulation were classified under the heading Secondary Mortuary Treatment. The paper was reviewed positively and generated no substantive controversy. But there are at least 300 documented structures at Çatalhöyük, and excavations have so far reached the lower levels of fewer than 40. Every structure that has been fully excavated to floor level has produced burials beneath its sleeping platform, every one. The site was occupied for 1,800 years, generation following generation sleeping above the processed remains of the people who had slept there before them, and the skulls moved between houses in a pattern that has not yet been mapped. Number 5. Maeshowe. The Neolithic chambered cairn in Orkney, Scotland, was broken into during the 12th century CE by Norse explorers who left behind the largest collection of runic inscriptions outside Scandinavia, and the carvings they made describe what they found inside as gone. Maeshowe is a chambered tomb on the Orkney mainland constructed around 2800 BCE. It consists of a central chamber roughly the size of a large room, built from sandstone slabs fitted without mortar to tolerances that allow no daylight through the joins, approached by a low stone passage 27 meters long. The passage is oriented so that the setting sun on the winter solstice shines directly into the chamber. In the winter of 1153 CE, a group of Norse crusaders on their way to the Holy Land sheltered in or near the mound during a storm. According to a later saga account, 2 members of the party went mad during the night. The following day, the group entered the chamber and left behind carvings in Old Norse runes cut directly into the stone walls. There are 30 inscriptions. They are the longest collection of runic text found outside Scandinavia. Runologist Aslak Liestel of the University of Oslo formally translated the inscriptions in 1964. The majority are mundane names, boasts, references to treasure, but several refer to something the Crusaders took from the chamber. One inscription reads in Liestel's translation that treasure was carried off in 3 nights. Another states that this how was broken into long ago. A third, carved in a different hand and at a different height, reads only that the thing taken away would make most men pale to know of. The chamber, when formally excavated by James Farah in 1861, contained no burial goods, no human remains, and no artifacts of any kind. The walls were bare except for the runes. The 1861 excavation report noted the absence of burial goods and attributed it to the Norse incursion. The rune describing paleness was translated in an 1862 Society of Antiquaries of Scotland report as referring to gold. Liestel's 1964 translation, which rendered it differently, was published in a specialist runology journal. Historic Scotland formally designated Maeshowe a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1999. The standard interpretive materials at the site describe the Norse inscriptions as graffiti and note that the tomb was likely robbed of its contents before the Norse arrived. The inscription about paleness is not quoted in the visitor information. And yet Maeshowe was sealed. The entrance passage was blocked with a single stone that requires the effort of several adults to move, and the passage itself forces any person entering to bend double for 27 meters. Whatever was placed at the center was placed there by people who expected difficulty to be sufficient protection, and it was sufficient for roughly 3,000 years, until one night in 1153 in a storm when it wasn't. Number 4. The Tomb of the Eagles. The human bones found on the island of South Ronaldsay were not buried in the conventional sense. They were processed, sorted, and stored with the same systematic attention given to the talons of the white-tailed eagles found beside them. The Tomb of the Eagles, formerly Isbister Chamber Tomb, is a Neolithic burial site on the island of South Ronaldsay in Orkney, Scotland, constructed around 3150 BCE, and in use for roughly 800 years. It was discovered in 1958 by farmer Ronald Simison, who was moving stones from a field, and found himself looking into a sealed stone chamber containing human skulls stacked against the walls. Simison did not report the discovery for 14 years. He continued farming. Occasionally he brought groups of interested neighbors to look at the skulls. In 1976 he contacted the Orkney archaeologist John Hedges, who formally excavated the site between 1976 and 1979. Hedges documented the remains of a minimum of 342 individuals. Based on the bone count conducted by physical anthropologist Don Brothwell of University College London, the bones were not intact skeletons. They had been disarticulated before deposition, the long bones sorted and stacked separately from the skulls, which were grouped along the chamber walls. Mixed throughout the human bone assemblage were the skeletal remains of white-tailed eagles, talons, beaks, and wing bones, deposited with the same deliberate sorting applied to the human material. Brothwell noted that several human long bones showed cut marks consistent with deliberate defleshing, applied after death. The discovery was reported in regional Orkney press as a remarkable Neolithic ossuary. The defleshing evidence appeared in Hedges' technical monograph. The eagles were described in popular accounts as a tribal totem. Hedges published his formal report, Tomb of the Eagles, in 1984. The cut marks and the eagle human bone interleaving were classified as evidence of excarnation, a mortuary practice in which bodies are exposed to the elements or birds before final deposition. The classification is academically accepted and has not been disputed. But excarnation does not require a roof. The Isbister tomb is fully enclosed, sealed against the elements, built to last. 342 people were processed, sorted, and stored inside a structure someone went to considerable effort to make permanent, alongside the bones of birds that are among the largest raptors in Europe, with wingspans that would not fit through the tomb's entrance passageway without folding. The eagles were brought in as parts. The tomb has been in use as a visitor attraction since 1981, and Simison, who found it, charged admission from a repurposed farmhouse until his death. Number 3. The Hypogeum of Ħal Saflieni. The prehistoric underground temple in Malta was cut from solid limestone 3 floors below street level, and when it was rediscovered in 1902, it contained the remains of 7,000 people in a space not much larger than a suburban house. The Hypogeum of Ħal Saflieni is an underground complex in Paola, Malta, carved from limestone beginning approximately 4000 BCE and used for roughly 1500 years. It is 3 floors deep, the lowest level reaching roughly 10 meters below the surface. Workers laying foundations for a housing development broke through its roof in 1902 and fell into the upper level. The Malta Antiquities Authority was notified. Excavations conducted by Themistocles Zammit of the Malta Museum between 1903 and 1911 documented the site's interior architecture, chambers, niches, and a central hall, and recovered the human remains. The final bone count, adjusted by subsequent reanalysis, suggested a minimum of 7,000 individuals deposited in a space that above ground would accommodate a modest residential property. Zammit's excavation reports filed with the Malta Archaeological Society noted an unusual acoustic property of the central chamber. Sound produced in it at specific frequencies resonated through the complex at a volume audible in rooms sealed from direct connection to the chamber. Physicist Igor Reznikov, who studied the acoustics formally in 1988 on behalf of the Maltese Heritage Authority, found that the resonance frequency of the central chamber matched the lower range of adult male vocal production, approximately 110 Hz. At that frequency, sound produced in the chamber could be felt as vibration in the chest of a person standing in the deepest room, 10 meters below. The 1903 discovery was reported in the Maltese press. The 7,000 remains were described as a communal burial ground. Zammit's acoustic notes appeared in a footnote to his 1910 interim report. The Hypogeum was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. The acoustic properties have been the subject of academic papers including work by archaeoacoustician Rupert Till of the University of Huddersfield, published in 2008. The standard Heritage Malta visitor materials describe the acoustics as a notable feature. Daily visitor numbers are capped at 80 to prevent humidity damage to the plaster decorations. And yet 7,000 bodies in 1,500 years means an average of more than 4 depositions per month. Month after month, century after century brought down a carved staircase in the dark, placed in niches cut to receive them, at a site where the sound of a human voice at the right pitch could be felt by anyone standing at the lowest level. The housing development that broke through the roof in 1902 was completed. People moved in. They lived above the Hypogeum for a decade before the excavation was finished. Number 2. The Pit of Bones at Atapuerca. The cave in northern Spain holds the largest collection of hominin fossils ever found in a single location, and the only way the bones got there was that someone or something carried them to the edge of a 13-meter shaft and dropped them in. The Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, is a natural shaft in the cave system of the Sierra de Atapuerca in Burgos Province, Spain. It is reached by 600 meters of horizontal cave passage followed by a vertical drop of 13 meters. At the bottom of the shaft, accessible only by rope, a team from the University of Burgos led by Juan Luis Arzuaga began excavating in 1984. What they found at the bottom has been accumulating in sediment for approximately 430,000 years. As of the most recent formal count published in 2016, the shaft contains the remains of at least 28 individual hominins, classified as Homo heidelbergensis, an archaic human species, making it the largest single concentration of pre-modern human fossils ever discovered anywhere on Earth. Arzuaga, a paleoanthropologist who holds a joint appointment at the Complutense University of Madrid and the Natural History Museum, has stated in peer-reviewed publications that the bone deposit cannot be explained by natural accumulation. The shaft is a vertical drop with no connecting passages. There are no carnivore tooth marks on the bones. There is no evidence of a rockfall, a flood deposit, or any geological process that would transport bodies from the cave entrance, 600 meters away, at surface level to the bottom of the shaft. The bodies were carried there, by something, 430,000 years ago before the cognitive and behavioral complexity archaeologists conventionally associate with intentional burial had been established in the fossil record. The discovery was reported internationally beginning in the late 1980s as evidence of early hominin mortuary behavior, one of the oldest known examples of deliberate body disposal. The absence of a satisfying mechanism received coverage in academic journals. Archaeology and his team formally published the evidence for intentional disposal in the Journal of Human Evolution in 1997 and in Science in 2016. The classification of the site as evidence of pre-modern funerary behavior has been broadly accepted and cited in evolutionary biology curricula. The site remains an active excavation. But intentional disposal requires intent, and intent at 430,000 years ago rewrites the timeline of abstract thought by a margin that most models of human cognitive evolution cannot accommodate without revision. The shaft at Atapuerca is not the only one in the cave system. It is simply the one that was opened. The others have not been excavated. They sit in the dark at the bottom of their own drops, and whatever is at the bottom of them has been there, undisturbed, for longer than our species has existed. Number 1. The sealed inner chamber of Palenque. When Alberto Ruz Luelier finally reached the bottom of the staircase he had spent 4 years uncovering, he found a tomb that had been sealed from the inside. In 1948, Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruz Luelier noticed that the floor of the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, a Maya ceremonial structure in what is now the state of Chiapas, Mexico, built in approximately 683 CE, had been modified. One of the floor stones had a double row of drilled holes along its edge, stopped with removable plugs. Ruz pulled the plugs and lifted the stone. Beneath it was a sealed staircase filled with rubble, each step packed tight with compacted soil and stone. Ruz and his team spent 4 excavation seasons, from 1949 to 1952, removing the fill by hand step by step, in the heat of a Chiapas summer, descending into the pyramid's interior. At the base of the stairs in June 1952, they broke through a triangular stone door into a chamber 12 meters below the temple floor. Inside was a stone sarcophagus nearly 4 meters long, covered by a carved lid weighing roughly 20 metric tons. Around the room, pressed against the walls, were the skeletal remains of 6 young adults, 4 male, 2 female, whose bones showed evidence of deliberate perimortem preparation. Ruz recorded that the air in the chamber when the door opened was cold, noticeably, strangely cold, in a region where the ambient temperature at that depth should have been consistent with the surrounding earth. Epigrapher Heinrich Berlin, then affiliated with the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, analyzed the glyphs on the sarcophagus lid in 1952. The carvings depicted Kayinish Janub Pakal, the king of Palenque, in a posture associated with death and descent, falling backward into the earth. The surrounding inscriptions were astronomical, dates calculated across thousands of years, forward and backward from the moment of interment. Ruz noted in his field journal that the 6 bodies around the sarcophagus had not been placed there before the chamber was sealed. The positions of the bones relative to the doorway indicated they had been placed after the sarcophagus was set and before the door was mortared shut from within. The door's mortar was on the interior face. The discovery was announced by the Instituto Nacional in August 1952 and reported internationally as the first royal Maya tomb found intact. Time magazine ran a photograph of the lid. Ruz's observation about the door's interior mortar appeared in his 1952 excavation report, in Spanish, in a paragraph about construction methods. The tomb was formally classified by INAH as the burial chamber of Pakal the Great. The interior mortar was attributed to construction procedure workers. It was explained, completing the seal from the inside before exiting through a separate route. No secondary exit has been identified. Palenque became one of the most visited archaeological sites in Mexico. But whoever mortared that door from the inside did not exit. The 6 people whose bones were found around the room did not exit, and the sarcophagus itself was too large to have been carried down the staircase. The dimensions of the lid exceed the width of the passage at every point. It was built there inside the chamber before the chamber was sealed, which means the sequence of construction was: place the sarcophagus, seal the room, and then fill the staircase above it, step by step, with 4 seasons worth of rubble, until the temple floor above was smooth and unmarked, and the hole with its removable plugs was simply another floor stone in a building full of floor stones. These 10 sites share one property that their discoverers noted and their official records did not emphasize: every one of them was built to stay shut. Not buried by time, not lost to conquest, sealed by the people who built them with engineering specific to the task of permanent closure and materials chosen to last. What they sealed inside was not always a body. Sometimes it was a sound, a position, and absence. Sometimes it was a door mortared from within. The consistent variable is not what was placed inside. It is the consistent, deliberate, cross-cultural decision, made by people separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, that whatever was inside should remain there, and the equally consistent decision made across the last 2 centuries of archaeology to open them anyway. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.